or two to introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I am Steve Grumbine. I'm the founder of Real Progressive Citizens Media. And we started this as kind of a joke, ironically, against the quote-unquote real Democrats. Little did we know that it was going to blow up. And we've been doing this now for almost 2 years. And we have, I believe we've thrived because we've stayed consistent. We've stayed true to our message. And we've kicked people who are friendly when they're wrong, and we have hugged them when they're right, and we have tried to always present truth, and we've tried to be educators, and I think that is a key differentiator in the progressive movement, is that we deal in truth, and that we deal in trying to make people aware of a reality that maybe the MSM has led them to believe is an alternate reality, the gaslighting. We are the cure to gaslighting, and I think that's kind of our claim to fame, so to speak. So thanks.
Hey, I'm Lee Camp. I'm a comedian and activist, barely a comedian first, and I have a kind of 2 TV shows. One's called Redacted Tonight, the other's called Redacted VIP. The VIP one is interviews that are pretty serious usually. But Redacted Tonight is a comedy show, and I try and talk about very important issues and a mental paradigm shift that needs to take place in this country, in this world, in order for us to survive more than a couple of more years. So I try and get it out through comedy, and I think a lot of people use different forms of art to get that message forward of change and mental shift and awareness, and I do it with comedy. So yeah, the show's called Redacted Tonight, and I'm excited to be here, and I was excited to hear a lot of things that I heard earlier. I think we're all in agreement on a lot of this stuff.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noah Chana. I am a lead organizer with the group Impact, MPACT, which was created by former Senator Nina Turner, Dr. Cornel West, and Killer Mike. Also in conjunction with Marcus Farrell, who is Bernie Sanders' African-American Outreach Director, focusing on building local power in underrepresented communities, particularly looking at addressing electoral and other political access in Black communities in particular. In addition to that, I'm a lawyer and mom, and by my other trade has now become delving in independent media with Progressive Army and my show, The Win with Noah. Not nearly as big or impressive as these 2 gentlemen to my left, but definitely stepped into the foray it's been about approximately a year I've worked with Progressive Army to look at how do we put not just attention on the disparities in coverage about real issues that are not being adequately addressed in mainstream media, but also lifting up the voices and the work that's being done by people on the ground. I mean, we all know the mainstream, big-name activists and organizers and issues, but there are a lot of people who are working on very local levels, on very local issues that are still absolutely important and deserve to have that attention placed upon them. So I look forward to our discussion today, and thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so let's get started with the questions. And again, as we go forward, keep in mind one aspect. We're going to let each, since there's only 3 of you, we'll let each of you respond to each of the questions. But keep in mind, we're looking for ways that, perspectives that we're all in this together. So we, as electoral or activist bodies, can help you in the media, and the way you can help us as well. So for the first question, you're going to love this one. To what extent can we trust the mainstream media to provide critical and unbiased perspective on the evolving political situation? So you can chew on that and go right down the line.
So it's interesting as you listen to guys like Paul Krugman recently. Paul Krugman is the lapdog for the DNC and so forth in the neoliberal agenda. And what Paul Krugman does is when the Democrats are in power, Paul Krugman talks about how wonderful deficits are. Paul Krugman tells everybody we need to spend, we need to spend, we need to spend. But then what happens? Donald Trump comes into office, and now all of a sudden Paul Krugman goes and shows he's not an economist, doesn't even play one on TV anymore, he's a hack. And so what does he do? He says now all of a sudden, Trump is going to blow the deficit out of the water. Trump is going to destroy the economy with spending and more spending, just unbelievable amounts of spending. So you got to ask yourself, is economics political, or is economics kind of like just what it is? And so when I think about this, every one of our unified issues is about spending on the environment so we can find a way to solve climate change. It is about single-payer health care. It is about a host of things like a federal job guarantee or a basic income or expanding Social Security. None of that stuff is going to happen if we try to meet our spending with our level of taxation. In other words, we have to deficit spend to do these things. So what happens is that when you've got a guy like Paul Krugman in there, who is mainstream media, he's lying to you. He is flat out lying to you. And then what happens? The CNNs repeat it. And then the MSNBCs repeat it. And then every one of them repeat this lie, and he's got the prize, right? He's sacred. There's nothing more sacred to them than Paul Krugman. But that is your new narrative. And now all of a sudden the lemmings and the sheep and everybody else start repeating what they heard. And now all of a sudden deficits are bad. The debt is scary. We're broke. We're not broke. So how do you debunk that, right? How do we realize that our agenda as progressives is being hijacked by the mainstream media? Everything that we want to do, the mainstream media is telling us is impossible. Every single thing that we want to do is pie in the sky, if you remember back to the debates. So I think from our standpoint, we try to get down to brass tacks and get to truth. And I think that that is what all of us seek. We want to have a progressive agenda. We don't want to just be fists in the air angry. We want to actually deliver. And I think that as an activist media organization, as real progressives, our goal is to enable a Green New Deal, or Bernie Sanders' plans that he said prior to going over the other side, so to speak. I mean, that's what this is about, right? I mean, that's what we're here for. The unification is around the ideas of what we're for, not what we're against. If I have to tell you I'm against the Republican Party's fascist plans, then we've got a gap there, right? That's kind of a given. It should be a given anyway. I need to tell you what I'm for. And that, I think, is the problem with the mainstream media. The mainstream media, it plays to a narrative. You hear it enough, like water dripping down. It erodes your sense of truth. It erodes your sense of awareness. And all of a sudden, you're living in a Truman Show. And you've got nothing but fake bullshit lies to live with. And so I think as our role is to be truth tellers and to provide a true narrative, an explorative, truth-seeking narrative. That even when we were wrong, that we dig and endeavor to find out what's right. So I think that that is the unifying message. I personally believe economics is our unifying message. But the narrative that you're going to hear from the mainstream media, I believe, is treasonous. And I think that that's where our unity comes from.
So the question was, how much can you trust the mainstream media? Zero. No, I think that occasionally they are right, and occasionally they do great reporting on something very important, and the reason is because it fits with a certain talking points that they're trying to get out. And so then they will do that good reporting, but only when it fits with the storyline that they're trying to push. But in general, it is a very pro-corporate, profit-over-people narrative, whether it's, Fox News or MSNBC or whatever. They all fit under that same umbrella. And you have to also listen to how they talk about things. It's like, well, what will make America attractive for companies, corporations to come back here? Well, what does attractive mean for a corporation? It means workers are exploited. It means workers are willing to work for as little as possible. So, the stock market is doing great. Look how great it's doing. Well, why is the stock market doing great? Well, it's doing great because a very select few individuals are profiting immensely, and workers are exploited to the point that they're willing to work for pennies. Well, great, stock market's doing great. But that's not, you've got to listen to the way things are talked about. It's not just whether they're covering this story or that story. It is the the words being used and what they mean, and that's why we need a mental shift on these things. And you know, he was saying it's like drips of water that erode people, and it's amazing to see even people that are willing to question falling into these idiotic thought processes or ideas because it's just repeated over and over and over, and then it has to be true. And they stop asking the questions. And so I think we on the alternative media need to, unfortunately, repeat what we're talking about over and over and over. And Standing Rock's a great example. You know, it wasn't just the 2,000, was it 2,000? Youth that ran, no, they ran 2,000 miles. But the youth ran from Standing Rock 2,000 miles to D.C. And that image, that idea caught fire a little bit. And then this idea, chaining people to the pipeline caught, okay, that storyline got, okay, well now they're getting attacked by dogs. Well that gets, and it's each of these things adding up into something that, oh, now we've got the nation paying attention. And so it's got to be repeated, it's got to be covered again and again and again in different ways. And then we are competitive with the mainstream media. Then our storylines can compete with their storylines. And you're seeing that again and again, and that's how Bernie Sanders was able to get to the point he was. Granted, it was still stolen from him because we have a ridiculous voting system that doesn't actually count votes, but he was able to get to the point he was because the outside media is now nearly equivalent to the mainstream media. The alternative media is now nearly equivalent. So you can see Bernie Sanders getting Trump's getting 23 times as much coverage during the primaries as Bernie Sanders, and yet he's able to compete. And that's only happening now. That's only since, you know, Occupy and our social media has gotten to this point. And you're going to see them continue to try and crack down on it. You're going to see they're going to push net neutrality. They're not giving up on this stuff. It's going to, you know, Facebook's going to keep censoring things. And so we've got to create our outside platforms and ways to get the message out that can compete with the drumbeat of an incredibly jingoistic, profit over people mainstream media. And we're getting there, but it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
So Lee is going to make this very difficult for me for the rest of the panel, obviously. But I would, and you guys can chime in when it's your turn to ask questions, but I would posit that when have we ever been able to trust the mainstream media to honestly reflect and engage and inform on our issues? You know, I spent my time growing up in Chicago and Harlem, and I don't recall really ever seeing any real reflection of the issues and the people in the communities where I was growing up in, ever in mainstream media. They're so quick to tell you that 600 people were murdered in Chicago last year, but then we don't have the same coverage and degree of discussion occurring in the mainstream media of issues, whether it's Rahm Emanuel closing down mental health centers, or the way Arnie Duncan decimated the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago to the public school opportunity. We're so focused right now because Betsy DeVos is so evil. But those issues that we're fighting right now have been already laid over generations of systemic problematic decision-making by both sides. And that's not always currently reflected or previously reflected in our media. We've had, I'm not going to say media has always been completely bad and untrustworthy. There definitely seems to have been, particularly with this election cycle and this focus on elevating one particular person on the liberal side or whatever that's supposed to even be, to a position of this presidency, and that absolutely failed. But there does seem to have been an uptick over the last several years, as Lee was just saying, in terms of constructing certain narratives that block out anything other than what the mainstream or the powers that be want us to see and understand. So can we trust them to actually, you know, report accurately, even on an event such as this? Of course not. You know, we're going to have to be in constant check, not just in terms of our own work internally as we try to advocate and get out the word on these various issues, on the different work people are doing, but we also have to be a check and a balance on what's going on. We've seen the Washington Post, you know, report on so-called fake news and then themselves turn around and be the biggest purveyor of fake news over the past several months, right? We've seen CNN do the same thing. How do you report a story about supposedly Russian hacking at a Vermont utility and it's not even founded on anything factual, and then you don't even do a real retraction? But supposedly those are the real journalists. So supposedly those people we're supposed to be relying on to tell us the truth. You know, I've seen someone use the term towards a friend of mine who writes and does work in Florida. They talked about how, well, they're a legacy journalist. I don't know what type of elitist crap is in a legacy journalist, but seriously, the voices and opportunities and issues that we have that we can uplift, we need to be doing so. We can't rely on anyone else to tell our story. I mean, that's self-determination as most basic format. So.
I just want to jump off one thing that you said is not, the key is for us to also not fall into talking about the things that are borderline meaningless, that is what's being covered on every network. So it's not that it's not real. Did Trump actually, some of the time it's not real, but did Trump actually tweet this crazy thing? Yeah, he did. But as long as we're talking about that, we're not talking about the real issues. So it is, even just the horse race in general, of the presidential horse race, cover up, just flat out, it was a tsunami over everything that mattered in Americans' lives for, the past year. So, I'm not saying never mention that Trump's the president or never mention what's going on with that, but it's like, as long as we're giving into that, we're not talking about people's lives and the reality of the situation. So it almost serves as much purpose for Trump just to cover up what we really need to be talking about, as it does for him to actually be doing harm. It's like the corporatocracy as a whole can continue their exploitation, their profit over people, no matter what Trump tweeted. So we've got to remember what is the real story, even if it doesn't get as many clicks, and keep covering that.
Thank you. I want to build on something that you said, Lee, in your first answer to the last question. You had said that the independent media is almost equivalent to the mainstream media. So I want you guys to expand on that a little bit and also discuss what the obstacles are that are preventing independent media from reaching more people, from going mainstream, reaching the number of people that we want to reach. I'm going to make this easier for Noah. I'm going to start down here, so get to it under.
I think Lee has a really great point about the growth of alternative independent media. Like, when you see the reach that certain stories have had, or you see people across the country that are tuning out of the mainstream major networks and tuning into Real Progressive, tuning into We Can, tuning into all these different shows and listening, whether downloading the podcast version or actually watching live, that's huge, right? But to be able, the biggest challenge I see is not just, a big challenge is the money. Because we're competing against very well-funded, corporate-sponsored, whether it's even with NPR, which gets whatever it gets. But seriously though, we're competing against, big money in a completely different field than what we've talked about in the political realm, but it's still very similar, and it makes competition difficult when you're a smaller, underfunded outlet that's really trying to showcase and get, the word out. For us to be able to be here is a privilege, because so many people cannot even come together like this. So that's one thing I think, and then also reach, because a lot of people still aren't even engaging on the internet in this way. We're it's still a privilege to be able to even engage the way we do with what we're doing. There are a lot of people in many neighborhoods that are, again, going back to the deal with underrepresented neighborhoods, as much as I love Bernie Sanders and supporting him, there were many people that were not even touched by the campaign because there's the same mentality that we're not looking at talking to certain people. It's wonderful, having lived in West Virginia, that he went to McDowell County the way that he did, but most people in McDowell County are still going to get their news from their local news affiliate, and maybe for those who turn into Fox News. They're not necessarily going to be reached by us for just sheer fact that they're not necessarily engaging in the same spaces we all are on social media. So this is where I think you all, through your work, definitely help amplify what we do on the media side of things, because through your work and touching the people you touch on the ground, through your organization's outreach, engagement, just talking to people offline, that helps spread the word that, hey, there's a real deal out there that you're not seeing because it's not on your TV, it's not on your Bluetooth, but you're an artiste and that is on the TV, so that's a little different too.
Rare.
It's rare, but it's a little different. But even that still, how many people even know that is even an option? Particularly with that stupid report that came out that blamed RT and you and everybody else for everything that went wrong. Like seriously, so there is a challenge, but I think it's a worthy one that we all can definitely mount and bring together and look at how do we leverage alternative sources, even if it's doing something like streaming through a Hulu type service that we created ourselves. But getting actually on the ground and getting people the information that these alternatives exist is crucial. because we're not gonna see an advertisement for it on ABC.
Well, there's a lot of answers to this question, how do we build up alternative media? But I'm just going to focus on one thing, and some people might find this annoying, but don't be boring. Don't be boring. It's not enough to just be right. You can be super right and super smart and just boring. That is a thing. So it's, you know, and some people are like, if I'm talking about a very important story and I title it with maybe a clickbaity title, but everything in it is the truth and I'm not lying in the title, I'm just like, you know, you just make it an interesting title. To me, that's not a problem. If someone's like, yeah, guess what? That's how it works, all right? If you got to put a thumbnail there that's an interesting thumbnail image, even though it might not be just the boring image of the hearing or whatever, that's okay, because people then watch it and they learn and they or as long as you're giving them the truth and you're giving them the real story, then just don't be boring. And there are some amazing people that I can sit and watch for a long time because I care enough to devote that time. But you're trying to convert people that aren't already converted. You're trying to speak to not the choir. And so I think it just is, and they figured this out in the reverse too, by the way. The most effective evil is incredibly boring evil. All right? It is ALEC. It is just, and no one wants to sit and study the bills that ALEC has put forward to the legislatures. Boring evil is incredibly effective. So change has to not be boring. And truth has to not be boring. And I think a lot of people in this room are doing a great job at that. At being not boring. I really think they are. I mean, it's. I try and use comedy. Different people use different things. Kevin and Margaret made a balloon shaped like an ass to stop the TPP. I mean, incredible and creative stuff. And we all have that in this room in spades, and we just got to keep doing that. And that's how we compete with the mainstream media.
So, one of the things that Real Progressives has started doing is we started incorporating some of these split-screen interviews, and because my focus is largely economics, we bring in the different economists. And if any of you all have ever watched these people live, it's like literally watching paint dry. I mean, it's maybe the most boring thing you will ever see. Always has bad sound quality, you can't hear what they're saying, you gotta like really turn it up loud, and then all of a sudden somebody starts coughing really loud. It's just the worst production quality ever. To Lee's point, it's boring in the wrong way. So, I brought in a gentleman named Alice Winningham, who is an incredibly brilliant economist and econometrics genius. And this guy wears a Sex Pistols shirt, he wears a do-rag, and he comes in there and says, "Fuck this and fuck that and fuck the other." And everybody laughs. They think it's hilarious. And here's this guy that is absolutely dropping heavy-duty amounts of knowledge on them. And so they're laughing, and all at the same time, they're actually learning economics. They're learning to defeat neoliberalism. They're learning what it really means to be a neoliberal, not just throw the word around. And so I think that is incredibly important. As far as... it's a dual-edged sword because part of our shtick is live streams. And so familiarity breeds contempt. People sometimes overly associate themselves with you, think that they know who you are and so forth. And you go on there and you do something bombastic. And they're like, "Oh God, he's an asshole. Oh my God, he's such a meanie. Oh, look at how arrogant he is." And it's all shtick. Dropping the elbow of truth from the top rope, and be like, "Who is this guy?" And, so there is an aspect of grab them where they're at and then rope them in with truth. And unfortunately, the mainstream media will play that off as, "You guys are a bunch of ignorant assholes. You don't know what you're talking about. Look at these jokers. Ignore them." And the fact is that our audiences actually pay attention. The question is, can we penetrate outside the progressive bubble? I mean, can we actually build something that exceeds friendly territory? And, Lee obviously has that in spades. Everybody loves watching Lee. The question is, can alternative media, we do, we love you.
Not from the Twitter comments I get, not everybody.
Well, you know, I've got people out there saying that I'm Soros bought because I don't sit there and bang on Soros. I got people out there saying that I'm a Trumper because I don't actually go out and talk about Rothschilds! You know, and I don't do all these things because I'm like, what are you going to do? Put poison in the butler's, you know, soda and have them hand it off to the Rothschilds so that, you know, there's your revolution? I mean, give me a frickin' break. It's just as bad on this side as it is over here. Truth is, I think, you know, our elixir to actually making a progress. But anyway, with all that said and done, I think that there's one thing that I want to state here unequivocally about progressive media. We cannot be gatekeepers. We have got to work together because our enemy is far greater than us. And unfortunately, we do have some gatekeepers out there. We have some cult of personality. We've got some talking heads that are, you know, really in it for themselves. And I swear to God, I wake up every morning looking at my 15-month-old son, and I say, this is what the hell I'm doing it for. And if you're not in it for the right reasons, at least make sure you present truth. You know, but if you are in it for the right reasons, for God's sake, bond together and work together. Don't be an island unto yourself. Don't be a gatekeeper. Let's make this thing grow and expand beyond our territory.
Okay, we're going to finish up with one last question that circles back to collaboration, and there's been some allusion to it in the last answer, and I know you mentioned this before. I just would like you each to make a comment or two about, with an eye towards collaboration, what do you need from progressive electoral groups, progressive activist groups to help you guys? I know we'll talk a little bit about this. Also, maybe if you have an idea, what does collaboration look like between independent progressive media outlets? Is there collaboration? And what does that look like if there is? So if you would address one of those points.
So, you know, we all know each other at some level, shape, or form. Obviously, you have friendships, you know, and you get to talk to one another. But I think it's a process. I think this is really a relatively new thing. I think we're starting to now really realize, during the primaries in particular, a lot of us, you know, really kind of got a moment in the sun, and we got to get some exposure, and we stayed true to ourselves, and I think people kind of built some relationships, emotional relationships with that, but we also did it amongst each other as well. We talk offline, and we sometimes pull each other into our own things. I think that a lot more of that needs to take place. I think a lot less about my brand or my thing, and a lot more about the movement, you know. I think that's really key. One last point, and then I'll hand it over. From our standpoint, we're doing this on a shoestring budget. A lot of love, a lot of spit, a lot of glue, you know, and I think that, you know, people donating to the causes of the various groups to help them, and it doesn't mean money necessarily, sometimes it's just knowledge. Hey man, let me tell you how to do a 3-person split screen through YouTube. Hey, let me help you out with setting up your OBS or your whatever other program you decide you're going to use. Claudia turned me on, maybe you all know Claudia, she turned me on to this BeLive thing, and we've been doing our split screens through that, and it's been amazing. But I think that collaboration is more than just being on the show with each other. I think it's really about sharing knowledge. Hey, there's a story I found out about, guys. Let's make sure you pump this too. Is there a way for you to get this out there, etc. So I think it's really important that we share information, both technology-wise, access to guests and so forth. And you know, when we can, work with each other to cross-promote. I think it's very important to build a cohesive movement. Thanks.
Well, I'll just echo one thing he said about and I'm not talking about for my show Redacted Tonight, but I'm talking about other media platforms. Volunteer and you know, try and get other people to volunteer, because we're all strapped for time, we're all strapped for resources, but like he was saying, it's not just about money. It's, you know, for a lot of these social media platforms, they just need manpower, and so if you can offer any kind of expertise to a lot of them, I think that's incredibly important. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, in terms of you know, like my stuff, because I do have a weekly show. One of the things that people can do is just hit me up and tell me about stories. Tell me tell me the viewpoint, tell me what it is that's going on in your organization, and how you'd like to see it covered. That doesn't mean it'll always fit for my show, especially being a comedy show, but I also do interviews, but I am very overwhelmed, I think a lot of us are, and so it kind of just needs to be a regular email saying, hey, here's what I'm doing, and here's how it can be covered, and here's how it relates to other progressive causes, and it's one of those things that I may try and be tuned in, but I miss a whole hell of a lot of shit because there's so much going on. So I love when people hit me up, and I think this goes for most of these platforms. If you hit people up and say, this is what's going on and we need your help covering it, a certain percentage of the time it's going to work, and I think that's half the battle.
Just to echo what Steve and Lee have said, I really do think that the more we do share and build with each other, the better our entire industry, if you look at it, the industry becomes. I think Steve touched on a really great point, in terms of not just being on each other's shows, but actually helping to build out, that exposure, the content. I mean, from everything from cross-posting, cross-promoting. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can work together as a collective. And there is a little bit of, I do have my brand, this is my thing that happens because we all have invested so much time and energy into building something from scratch. I mean, I definitely understand looking at my kids who get annoyed with me for spending so much time away from them to do other things. Like, I'm missing basketball games this weekend and my 13-year-old is a little upset. But they also understand the value, but I also think, directing people like, okay, so I know what my wheelhouse is, but, your wheelhouse, like you said, economics, that's not my thing. Law, policy, other stuff is what I do very well. But I'm definitely willing and going to make sure that, like, hey, I didn't talk about this thing, but you're really interested. You really need to go check out them because they do that really well. And we do need to get to know each other, I think, a little bit more outside of what we see, like, on social media, to be able to say, I can direct you here, I can direct this person here, or, hey, come help me do this because I really think that through our mutual, platforms and exposure, we can really, get the attention needed on these issues. And we saw a lot of that with Standing Rock. I think Standing Rock is a really good example of how, activism and independent media, because it wasn't the mainstream media that picked up that story. It was activists on the ground, a lot of indigenous work and writing, first and foremost in terms of the media. I got to meet Ruth Buffalo at Roots Camp a couple months ago here in DC, and that was one of the points that she made in a panel discussion we're having about environmental justice, which actually had no people of color on it, which was fascinating. But that's a whole other story. But the point Ruth was making is that we need to actually be looking at, when we're covering these different issues and events, looking at the indigenous, whether we're talking about indigenous people specifically as a term, or the people in a community. Flint, Michigan is another example, right? There are people, activists, people actually doing this work locally on the ground. They should be our first go-to versus sending the resources to send our person there. Because maybe the resource that we're using to do that can be used to help do something else. But there's this voice in Flint that can actually be amplified and that can show a completely different experience. And that's something that we can do. I think when we're talking about collaborating and how do we help progressive media grow, yes, we need your help to grow, but I think it needs to be a symbiotic relationship with the different movement and organizations and activists that we're supporting and engaging with. Because again, I go back to Standing Rock again, that was a beautiful example in so many different ways. Because one of my friends, Desiree Kane, also did photojournalism, even though she was there, with people standing in solidarity. Those are her people, but she also was working, with Yes Magazine and doing photojournalism, and was able to leverage that relationship she had to help showcase what was actually happening. And her voice and the voice of so many others were represented in that way. And I think that's what we need to look at. So we do get sometimes stuck on our brand and building our thing and lose sight of the people that we say that we're helping and lifting up. And I think real progressives, Progressive Army, and other folks do a good job of trying to center the work and center the voices versus centering ourselves. And there are those out there, unfortunately, who sometimes the cult of personality is spot on. There are some people who sometimes center their brand and themselves. And not that we need to necessarily call people out or judge them, but find a way to help people make sure that we're centering the work, centering people, centering voices, centering this movement. And it's not just a moment, it's a movement, all those great catchy phrases we hear. but there's so much going on that needs to be adequately reflected, reported on, and engaged, and we can't do that if we're us focused all the time. And so I definitely appreciate sitting here with these two guys, because I've just learned so much in this conversation, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say as well.
Just last thing, and this is going to make me look like a good person, but it's secretly selfish. How can people on social media find out more about you and what you do? And then pass the microphone off to me.
Lee is not my new favorite person. I have a podcast that I do, The Way with Manoa, part of the Progressive Army and the Benjamin Dixon Show. I'm online at my website, thewayWithManoa.com. Find me on Twitter. Everything's The Way with Manoa. There's also a short video, if you're curious, on ANOA. So it's The Way with Manoa, ANOA.com. Same on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. But yeah, and my podcast is on iTunes and Spreaker and some other sites I can't remember right off the top of my head. But thank you.
So you can reach us on Facebook. Real Progressives has a page and it has a group. The page is where we do most of our work. We also have a YouTube channel. Please, please, please go ahead and sign up for our channel so you can get updates when we go live. We're trying to diversify since Facebook likes to censor so much. We're also on Twitter too, so look for us. Thanks.
Get it back to Lee. Everybody knows.
My selfish ploy didn't work. My show's called Redacted Tonight, and it's at youtube.com/redactedtonight or on RT America or facebook.com/redactedtonight, and I'm at leecamp.net. Thank you guys.
All right, everyone, thank you for our media panel. It's amazing. I think I speak on behalf of everybody here. It's really amazing to have news organizations that we can trust and count on to cover and advance progressive stories and the progressive news. And in the spirit of this summit, the purpose of and hopefully the outcome of this is to figure out ways we can help each other. I know that we need all your help to advance what we're doing, and they need our help as well. So let's have a big hand for these guys. Before we break for lunch, Erica's going to say a few words.
I don't really want to use this thing. I want to just tell you from personal experience, I built the PIP main page, as big as I could, doing everything else I do. But we've partnered with, we're partners with Real Progressives, of course, and we have partnered with Progressive Army. And they have access to our main page as admins. And we're so proud to lift their voices up, particularly because if I see another video of Benjamin Dixon that has 6 views when he's live, I'm going to freak out. So, we have beautiful talent in our communities, and we all need to be sure we're lifting up maybe those that are less known. So as a commitment to sharing, because that's what we're here for, Kevin here and Margaret have the Popular Resistance, which is a huge clearinghouse of progressive news, activist tools. You can put your actions in a schedule. Noah, would you get with him? Make sure that you guys can partner and reach out. Maybe he can lift your voices up. And same with Lee. Would you all promise to get together? And we have Occupy Wall Street out here. Woo! And they have a huge reach. So please, everybody talk amongst each other so we can lift each other, our voices up. Okay? And I'm going to give a few people opportunities to speak later, but right now, Ralph Nader is in the house. Yeah. And Jill Stein is in the house. So we're going to take a 10-15 minute break. There's lunch out, grab a plate, and get ready for the electoral panel. That's going to be good.